Welcome back, and welcome into part 6 of the Griffin Tape Deck restoration from 1962. All right, in this episode we're going to look at the voltages of all of the different stages and all of the different components, tubes, capacitors, resistors, things like that. But we're going to compare that to the voltages and stuff that we had in part 2. And we're going to see how much better it is operating now. Now, we don't have a service manual, but we can use the tube manual to make sure that the tubes are getting the voltages that they're supposed to be getting, and that we can then assume that they're going to be operating correctly. All right. And the reason you want to do this is because when you want to check different functions of the unit, you can't really figure out whether it's operating correctly, because the problem is that when the voltages are all over the place, you really can't determine if it's operating correctly. So in order to avoid any surprises at the end, we have to be able to make sure that the voltages are correct at the beginning. Let's take a look at that. Got the transport here. We've got the RP unit that we're going to smoke test, and then I've got a spot right here for a fire extinguisher if it's necessary. This is the record head and the erase head. This is the transport control. I'm not going to do the playhead because we haven't fixed this yet. The connector that we are going to end up using, which is a direct mate for the RP unit, is actually a 4-pin cinch Jones. I want to just bring this up very slowly on power, and just enough to get the filaments warm enough to conduct. I want to see it actually survive the initial power up. Let's go ahead and monitor the high voltage. Talk about being gun shy. I'm also spark shy. All right, so that's 135 volts. That's coming raw off the full wave rectifier. So now I'm going to gradually raise the line voltage. It looks like it's surviving. I'm at 80 volts going in now. 95, 100 volts going in. I'm not seeing any evidence of anything giving up the ghost. So I'm going to go to 115 because the readings that I took prior to recapping are going to be based on 115 volts line voltage. My prior readings on that particular point with 115 volts going in, I was getting 346 on that point. I'm getting 350 now. All right, so one can assume that there's less current draw. So now let's check out these two capacitors here. I'm going to go to this point, okay, 266, which was 256, and this side, which is 249. 249. The record section, the last voltage here is reading 136, used to be 128. And this was 90 volts before the capacitor changeouts, now 112. So the fact that the voltages are higher means that it's not wasting the current through the entire stages of this amplifier. So now I'm going to look at, this is the playback section right here. So this is first stage, second, third, fourth. I'm going to look at the plate voltages on these, the first 12 AX7. This is now 77, used to be 57. This plate voltage, 75, used to be 54. And on this side of that capacitor, 0. Used to be 1.6, okay? So let me just clarify, all right? 4 thousandths, tens, hundreds, thousands. Tim, learn how to use the decimal point.
Hey, Tim.
Huh?
You know why you were getting those really small negative voltages on the grids of those tubes? That's grid leak voltage. You see, a tube works on the principle of thermionic emission, which means that if you heat a conductor to the point that it begins to glow, it will start to emit electrons in a cloud around it. This is called a space charge. Do this in a vacuum, as in a vacuum tube, and the electrons are free to move around. The heated element in a vacuum tube is called a cathode. If you place another unheated element near the cathode, you can then make a current flow through the vacuum by just connecting a positive voltage to the unheated element while the cathode is grounded. But if you leave an unheated element like those grids you were testing, not connected to any voltage source, then the electrons from the space charge leak into the grid and out of the tube. Since electrons are negatively charged, the grid builds up a negative voltage, and we don't want that. So a grid leak resistor gets connected between the grid and ground, and this kills almost all of that negative voltage, except for the tiny amounts you were measuring.
You know, that's a great point. And that also reminds me, long time ago, long time ago, one of my instructors was describing how current flows through a circuit. The thermionic emission, the cathode is heated, and as was described, the grid without any heat on it is basically just going to be a cold conductor inside that tube. The cloud of electrons around that cathode is basically going to get picked up a little bit by that grid and show up as a potentially negative value. Well, let's just look at this for a second, okay? That grid needs to be at a low potential. What ends up happening is that coming off of that grid is going to be this resistor to ground. What the instructor had shared with me is that, okay, current flows from negative to positive. Got it, all right. But going this way through that resistor, then this becomes the negative side, and then this becomes the positive side, making this grid and this connection, this becomes slightly more positive because the electrons are flowing. Now, I kind of disagreed with that at the time, simply because, well, if electrons are flowing through that, then wouldn't that be negative? Because electrons are there. Because of the current flow from negative to positive through that component, then that becomes a more positive potential. But then at the same time, this cathode, which is right here, grid's here, cathode's here, okay? Coming off of this cathode is also going to be this resistor to ground with a bypass capacitor coming off of here. And this capacitor then is a bypass capacitor on that circuit. And electrons are going to be flowing from negative to positive through this circuit to this point right here on this cathode. Well, in the case of this cathode right here, all right, the cathode with its resistor and its capacitor is actually 0.76 volt positive, mind you. Now, that's on the cathode, but let's just take a look at that grid. Well, the grid is negative 7 thousandths of a volt. So the cathode is technically more positive than the grid at this point. There's no signal going through it. It's just basically just warm, ready to go. And what ends up happening is that because that voltage on the grid is more negative than the cathode, the tube is at cutoff. But by so little, I mean, just the minimum amount of voltage to get it to cut off, because the moment that you hit that with an audio signal, that tube is going to start to conduct, and it's going to be amplifying the signal. And it does that through every stage of this amplifier here. Now, the plate voltage for the next stage used to test at 47 volts on this plate before, and now it's 107. Okay, that means that the tube is not saturated and it's not being dragged down by the next stage because a capacitor was like not doing what it's supposed to. This is 106 and it was 41 before, 106 after, and it's virtually identical to the other plate, which means that the left and right channels are going to be getting the same amount of voltage, which means the tube, if the tube is in really good shape, it's going to be amplifying left and right equally. And stereo, I mean, be nice. It's not like you're going to be mixing a recording from the 1970s where you got everything over here and then everything over here. And it's like, well, we don't have to worry about capacitors because nobody's going to be playing audio on these things. It's going to be perfectly balanced. And it's like, yeah, well, again, 100 and what was this one? 106, 106.7. Okay. I'm guessing that this should be virtually zero, but we'll see. Well, what did it used to be? Used to be 28 volts. Now it's like there's no DC on there whatsoever. This thing is going to be incredible for audio. because it just wants to behave now. The next stage of this particular circuit is convoluted. It's just a whole lot of stuff going on right here, right now. Pin 1 and pin 6. So if I can get onto pin 1, do this very carefully, okay? So that's 103.7 on that plate, and then this plate here is 102.5. That's close enough. I mean, honestly, it's going to be close enough. But the beauty of this is now we look at what is coming off of the capacitor, the coupling cap. That says 52 volts, and it used to be 79. Oh, hang on, red flag. That capacitor is passing DC. No, it's not, okay? Because the next stage is a cathode follower, which means that the cathode, and hence the grid, is actually going to be well above ground potential, okay? And they're doing that because they want to decouple the cathode from any other circuitry that's in here. So that to me is cool. That's good. Now the last stage, the 12AU7, coming off the cathode is probably going to have a DC voltage on there of, 72 volts. But the output going to the output of this deck is 0.3. So capacitor's doing its job. Cathode on this one is 67 volts. And the output, that's doable, okay? And in the case of a cathode follower, what that really means is that the signal coming off of that tube that's going to be used for audio is actually coming off the cathode and not the plate. Helps if you pay attention to what you're doing. So yeah, 247 volts. So that's a relatively high voltage for that last stage. But again, they've put that tuned circuit in the cathode to raise the potential of the cathode up. So if you're already starting out, if you're not at ground, you're starting out at 51 volts, then you're going to need a much higher voltage just to make the tube conduct. So this is the playback preamplifier. This is the record preamp. Dual triodes, so you've got a left and right channel, left and right, left and right, left and right. It's dual triodes all the way through. One is for the left channel, one is for the right. Same thing for the playback, but I mean, this first tube, it's doing its job, but it's practically room temperature, okay? A little warmer than room temperature. This one is warmer than that one, okay? This one is warmer than that one, and that one's hot. But that's to be expected, okay? Especially the way that one is conducting, so it's all good. And I'm not even going to touch that rectifier tube because I know better. It's going to be hot as a three-ball dog, let me tell you. You know what? Let's treat ourselves, okay? Taking a look at these meters, okay? This is still powered up. As I was pointing out before, in the before time, before we had actually changed out all these capacitors, when you would change either one of these record volumes, the meter would just dance all over the place because that pot was not just adjusting the audio signal, but it was also taking that DC component that the audio was riding on. And so you were actually varying between a DC potential, and the needles on these meters were just dancing all over the place. I'm cranking that knob back and forth, and it's not getting louder or softer, it's just making noise. But what we have there is an intermittent white noise generator. But I can do this, no activity whatsoever, but I can hear something. There is audio coming out of this, and it's pretty freaking clean, let me tell you. Now, I'm gonna just show you something, okay? I'm just gonna turn these up. Audio, okay? Oh, hum on that channel over there, okay? Now, I'm just going to warn everybody who's watching, I own the copyright on hum, okay? I can use hum and nobody can steal it from me. I own that. Not going to use any music.
Help your body grow it, because it's never just about your hair. Calm. These statements have not been approved by the FDA.
M-O-U-S-E.
To diagnose, treat.
Okay. I can't get much more out of the meters right now because it's so freaking loud in here. let me see if I can turn these speakers down.
So the brain and the body aren't communicating at 100% anymore, and you get a malfunction.
He's been reading my mail. So that seems to be working just fine, but I'd like to feed it a stereo signal. So my producer has sent me a file that we can get away with playing through this and see it and hear it. And this is what I think we're getting. I gotta tell you, the ballistics on these meters are incredible. So I'll tell you that not actually trying to change any of the equalization switches on here, because the equalization switches are part of the playback. There is no real equalization going on into the record circuit. So it's whatever is going into the unit is going to be recorded onto the tape. What you do with it when you play it back is entirely up to you. Outstanding. This thing is, I think we're ready to take this to the next level. I would like to check the record circuit just for the erase oscillator and the erase current and the bias current going to the record head. I've got 0 dB on the meters, but the knobs, one of the knobs, the left channel is at approximately 11 o'clock and the right channel is at 12 o'clock. And I'd love to be able to show that to you. There. So what I'd like to be able to do here is to actually see what the levels are coming out of the outputs of this unit, because these switches here in front are for monitoring, and in the record mode, they're actually looking at the record preamplifier, and in the other mode, they're looking at the playback amplifier. Now, I don't have the playback heads connected just yet, so what we're hearing is basically what we used to call E to E, electronics to electronics. So it's basically the signal going in, going to the record circuit, and coming out, and that's what we're hearing, all right? What the meters are telling me is that at that middle stage that we talked about earlier, where all of the EQ and all that is going on in the playback part, is not going to probably be as accurate as we need it to be. I mean, I can measure the meters and, you know, the meters are going to say, okay, well, they're even. So, but what is the actual record level? Don't know that yet. So here's what we can do, which is going to be incredibly irritating. Basically do a tone sweep. And we can see how the meters respond to the different frequencies. It's a crude test. Okay, so not changing the pots. Let's see where we're at. Again, it's going to be really irritating. 15 hertz to 15K over 30 seconds. All right, here we go. Okay, much lower. .400 hertz. 1K. 2K. 5. 10. So that's where we're at right now. Is 1K. Just curious. Gotta tell you, these meters are tracking dead on with the pots at 11 and 12 o'clock, but it actually doesn't surprise me that it doesn't actually track just like that, especially when they put a balance pot on the playback side. I gotta tell you, I mean, it's just, I mean, on the one hand, yeah, okay, I want to be proud of me. I want to be excited that I did all the caps and everything like that and nothing went up in flames. But this is just so exciting to have this measure of success on something as complicated as this could be. And I don't want to blow my own horn, but what I'm really excited about is having done it, showed you how I did it, and then maybe you can come away from that with some insight into how you can do it yourself. Because the techniques and stuff as far as replacing capacitors is, you know, every bit you want to work on a guitar amplifier, you want to recap it, you want to, you know, deal with the tubes and stuff, and be able to understand how the tube is working and what the capacitors are actually doing and why, you know, and again, I have to stress this, that yes, you'll have a high DC voltage on one side of a cap coming off of a tube plate, all right? But when they're using a cathode follower and you see a high voltage on one side of the cap and a almost high voltage, maybe half that voltage, on the other side of the cap, you're thinking, oh, the cap is bad. Those are important things to know, because that way, when you understand how the circuit is really working, then you understand the behavior of everything that works around it. So, all things considered, the voltages are right where they're supposed to be. Now I can get a little bit deeper into making sure that all of the circuits are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. In the next episode, we find out why it's a good idea to do that, okay? Because with the voltages all correct now and everything doing what it's supposed to, when something else isn't doing what it's supposed to, that's when you take away their allowance, all right? You know, those kinds of things frustrate me. That's why I have to take the trash out. Listen, subscribe to our channel, all right? Give us a thumbs up, all right? And let us know about the comments, all right? But you're not allowed to comment on my humor, all right? All right, fine, go ahead. Patreon subscribers, I appreciate you guys helping us out, okay? The merchandise is on the way, okay? And the check is in the mail, all right? Thanks so much. I appreciate you guys. Service manuals are uploaded. You're going to be able to have access to all those and detailed episodes of things that get more into the weeds. If you're, you know, you want to go down that road, you're more than welcome. Thanks for watching, and we're going to see you in that next episode, I hope.